I heard the bride's brother had finished high school only. It would be a disgrace for us to accept the poor man without a college degree as one of the family.
It is my dear sister's wedding, as I was moved to tears seeing her radiant beauty, wishing our late father could witness it. Her Phil suddenly mocked me in his speech.
Should I prescribe some medicine for stupidity?
It seemed like he was trying to be funny, but he was the only one laughing. This troublemaker, spoiling what should have been a joyous occasion, continued to hurl insults directed solely at me. As everyone started to feel uncomfortable, my sister, the bride, began to laugh. The Phil looked puzzled by her reaction, but when she regained her composure, she coldly addressed him. With those words, he would come to regret every single thing he said. My name is Kevin Johnson. My father was a self-employed businessman, and thanks to his moderate success, our family of 4, including my parents and sister, lived a fairly comfortable life. With our comfortable living, I focused heavily on my schoolwork. Of course, I also valued participating in committees and hanging out with friends. Thanks to this, I was recognized as an honor student who performed well and was highly trusted. Proud of this, I continued to work hard. I always had someone by my side and never faced any hardships. I led a life untouched by despair. However, everything changed after a certain accident. It was my 11th grade winter. Just when I was thinking of buckling down for college, my father, David Johnson, passed away in a car accident. My mother, already frail, became bedridden. Due to the emotional toll of the accident, she had to frequently visit the hospital. On top of that, we discovered my father had left behind some debts. While his business seemed to be thriving, it appeared it just seemed that way. Between the funeral expenses and debt repayments, our savings dwindled to almost nothing. Given these circumstances, I decided not to go to college. I did so to support our daily living, my mother's medical expenses, and the education of my younger sister, Emily. With no work experience and a high school degree, I was hired as a restaurant staff member. A friend of my late father, knowing our situation, offered me a job at the restaurant he owned. But that income wasn't enough. On my days off and before shifts, I also took on a newspaper delivery job and did some home-based part-time work. About a year after I graduated high school, my mother's health improved, and she was able to handle household chores and simple part-time jobs.
Mom, Kevin, I won't go to college. I can let you two bear all the burden.
She suddenly proposed this. What are you saying, Emily? You should pursue your dreams without worrying about the household.
That's right, Emily. You always said you wanted to go to college, didn't you?
Both my mother and I disagreed with her idea. I didn't want Emily to give up what I had. Moreover, with our combined efforts, our living situation has somewhat stabilized. It wasn't exactly easy, but not to the point where Emily had to abandon her dreams to help out. Life is okay, so just follow your own path.
Kevin.
Repeating these words a few times, it seemed that she finally understood. A year went by.
I finished everything about my college.
Fortunately, Emily, who's graduating from high school, has decided on her future path. She got into an Ivy League, known nationwide, showing me and our mother an email. In the email, it read, "Accepted."
And look here.
What? Where she pointed, it read, "Emily Johnson as a scholarship student." She was chosen as a scholarship student, and amazingly, this scholarship covers all fees from admission through graduation.
Oh my, isn't that wonderful?
You did it, Emily. Apparently, she had been working hard aiming to be a scholarship student to avoid burdening the family, despite me telling her not to worry about us. With gratitude for her efforts, I thought this, meaning it as praise. 3 more years went by. Emily continued her hard work in college and was set to move on to get a job. I'll miss her, but I genuinely celebrated her new beginning. Seeing my sister pursue her dreams so passionately made me as happy as if it were about my own life. Time flies. 4 years and a bit had passed since Emily graduated from college. By then, our life had completely stabilized. My mother still had frequent health issues, but mentally, she was just as resilient as she was before our dad passed away. As for Emily, she landed a job at a major corporation post-college, working in the administrative department. From what I've heard, Emily is a quick learner and is highly regarded. There are many experienced administrators there, but seems like she works very well. Then, Emily suddenly announced she'd be getting married. Her fiancé is an executive at her company, and interestingly, the son of the current CEO. I believe his name was Michael Klein. Despite being the CEO's son, he is incredibly humble and genuine. He's quite the charmer, popular with many. But it's an honor as her brother to think that she's been chosen by such a man. I felt relieved, almost fatherly, that she didn't end up with the wrong guy. There was to be a meeting with the Klein family. Unfortunately, my mother fell ill right at that time. To fill that gap, I had to attend on short notice. I joined the meeting in place of my mother.
Thank you for coming today, especially given the bad weather.
Mr. Steve Klein, Michael's father and the CEO of the company where Emily works, began his greeting. Given that he's the CEO of a major corporation, he looks every bit the dignified figure. When I asked why his wife wasn't present, he replied that his wife passed away a few years ago. I should have asked Emily for more details before this. Oh, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. There was an awkward silence. During that time, only the sound of the rain loudly echoed around. As Steve mentioned, the weather was unfortunately very rainy.
Anyway, Emily is a wonderful lady.
Steve kept praising Emily, mentioning her intelligence and beauty repeatedly.
She graduated from a renowned college, didn't she?
He was all praise for Emily's college as well.
It's such an honor to have someone like Emily join our company, and to have her marry my son. What a blessing.
Oh, thank you for those kind words. It's nice that he praises my sister so much, but it's a bit too much, and I can't help but give a wry smile.
By the way,
With what was a full smile moments ago, Steve's face turned slightly serious and looked me straight in the eye. I met his gaze, wondering what was coming next.
which college did you graduate from?
Well, actually, Taken aback by the sudden question about my education, I hesitated. I graduated high school and started working, which is quite different from Emily's. But lying about it wouldn't do any good. Lies and misdeeds are always brought to light. So, I decided to be honest. I didn't go to college. I had to start working right after high school because of family circumstances.
Oh, really? Well.
After hearing about my educational background, Steve seemed a bit surprised. He then went into deep thought for a moment.
The reason he didn't go to college is.
Seemingly judging that my explanation was insufficient, Emily tried to explain. However, she was interrupted by Steve.
No need to explain further. I understand there might be personal reasons.
Although he chose his words carefully, he clearly looked down on me for not having a higher education. He tried to keep a smile, but it looked more like a smirk. Moreover, the end of his words from earlier had risen slightly, and there was a suppressed chuckle, as if he couldn't hold back a giggle.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Here's the appetizer for the course.
At that moment, the course meal we'd ordered was served. Both of us were excited about the marriage, and the initial meeting was supposed to be joyful. However, the mood became tense after just one conversation. As more and more delicious dishes were served, the atmosphere wasn't conducive to enjoying the flavors, and our meeting was over. The day of Emily and Michael's wedding, seeing her in beautiful makeup and a stunning wedding dress, I couldn't hold back my tears.
Don't cry before me, Kevin.
Sorry. I was to walk Emily down the aisle in place of our late father, but given the way I felt, it seemed like a daunting task.
Time to enter.
Guided by the attendant, we took our designated spots. The door swung open, and unusually loud music filled the hall. Honestly, my memory from that point onward is a bit hazy. It was partly because of the overwhelming nervousness and partly because my vision was blurred with tears. But one thing I do remember is the feeling of my chest being full with emotions built up over the years. The hardships Emily faced after our father passed away, changing our lives, and her efforts to save on tuition fees were immeasurable. Please take care of Emily. As I entrusted my sister, I whispered this to Michael, and he nodded back. Confirming his response, I returned to my seat, wiping my eyes with a towel. The reception continued pleasantly, and finally, Steve gave a formal speech. It began with words of thanks and went on for quite a while. He must have talked for about 15 minutes. I thought he was wrapping up soon, but he started a new topic.
Speaking of college,
He began, casting a glance my way.
I heard that the bride's brother didn't go to college.
As he disclosed my background without my permission, the hall buzzed with murmurs. Whether it was gossip about my past or complaints directed at Steve, I couldn't be sure.
Emily has such an impressive background, but her brother, well, it would be a disgrace for us to accept the poor man without a college degree as one of the family.
While I was still lost in my emotions, Steve practically named and shamed me. Of course, I was angry, but above all, I was filled with other feelings and farts.
Should I prescribe some meds for this fool?
Steve said with a smirk. He seemed to be trying to make a joke, but he was the only one laughing. The troublemaker who ruined the mood went on hurling insults at me personally for a while longer.
Well, that's all from me.
He concluded abruptly. Normally, there would be applause, but the guests were in a state of shock, resembling what we call being grossed out. Breaking that tense atmosphere, suddenly, a loud laughter echoed. Everyone looked around, wondering what was going on. Emily. After searching for a few seconds, it became apparent that the source of the laughter was Emily herself. Steve looked at her with a puzzled expression. Although not spoken aloud, his expression strongly conveyed a sense of what's so funny. Even after seeing Steve's face, Emily continued laughing, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. I was worried her makeup was going to get messed up. After her laughter subsided, she let out an exasperated sigh, looked at Steve.
Mr. President, don't you think you should at least remember the faces of the shareholders?
What? Shareholder?
Michael agreed with Emily's statement and shot a sharp glance at his father.
You don't remember my brother attending the shareholders meeting. He is a major shareholder in our company.
There were things I didn't know about her Phil, like the fact that his wife had passed away. However, I didn't think he didn't recognize me at all. When we met, I introduced myself, but I thought it was just a formality. But it seems it was genuinely the first time for him.
Huh? What?
Steve could only respond with a question mark. He seemed extremely flustered. Well, I slowly stood up and approached him. Emily has an impressive background, but what was about me again? He seemed speechless from the shock. He must have realized who he was talking to and what he had said based on Emily's words. My father owned a lot of stocks. When my father passed away, I was only in 11th grade. I was too young to invest in stocks, so my mother became the official heir to the shares. However, my mother wasn't in a good mental state, so the inherited stocks remained dormant for some time. By the time Emily reached college, my mother's mental state had considerably improved. She finally had the time to consider the inherited stocks. Upon closer inspection, most of the companies my father had invested in had grown significantly. The returns were more than enough to get us out of our financial struggle. Thanks to that, I can now solely rely on my restaurant business. From that time, I became interested in stocks and, like my father, began investing my surplus funds. Gradually, I increased my stock holdings, and now I can say I'm a major shareholder in Steve's company. Although it was a company mentioned in my father's notes, I sometimes think it was a very risky move. I'm glad the company became successful.
It's a shame, Dad.
Michael said to the trembling Steve with a dumbfounded look.
I admired you as a president who kept growing our business.
Michael,
Maybe his son's words snapped him back to reality, and he began to shake as he called out Michael's name.
But I can't believe you don't even remember the face of a shareholder. You lack awareness as a president. No, even before that. It's unacceptable to insult someone like that, especially he is our family.
Steve was crying, repeatedly murmuring his son's name.
I'm sorry, Dad, but you're the disgrace of our family.
Citing the words Steve had said earlier, Michael strongly reprimanded him. Steve let out and with a resentful but pale face, looked at me.
Why would a high school graduate buy shares in my company?
He pointed at me and asked weakly. By now, logic didn't matter one bit. Do you need an education to buy stocks? I replied in disbelief, and Steve turned beach red and looked down. Well, if I had to give a reason, it's because my father left a note saying I should buy shares in this company. Ever heard of David Johnson? When I mentioned my father's name, the color drained from his face and he turned pale again.
That guy, he was in an accident.
His shaking was anything but normal. Seeing this, Michael called in some help and ended the wedding. There were two reasons I bought shares in Steve's company. One was because Emily worked there. The other reason was what I told Steve. My father left it in his notes. Most of the shares my father owned belonged to his business partners. Among them was the name of Steve's company, but I never imagined Emily would end up working there and marrying the heir. Curious about this miraculous connection, I did some digging after that meeting. I found a few suspicious things. My father seems to have done business with your father in the past. I shared over the phone with Michael while examining my father's belongings.
Yes, I've heard of David Johnson. I was probably in elementary or middle school back then.
I found my father's planner. On the day of that unforgettable accident, there's an entry about dining with Steve.
Really? So what kind of business did my father and yours do?
Well, I pulled out a confidentiality agreement and other documents from the file and started to read the details of their business.
Wait, that business.
According to Michael, the work my father and Steve did together was what made Steve's company skyrocket. From what I could gather, they were doing a promising business together. My father tragically died, and Steve continued the work on his own and became wildly successful. A disturbing narrative was emerging, but it was too early to conclude anything. The story's development and conclusion weren't adding up yet.
In that case, we'd want records of when my father took over David's work. I'll look into it.
Please do. If you need any help, please ask Emily. I'll let her know as well.
Understood?
Some time after that, shortly after the wedding, Michael went to see Steve's hospital room and office after he had been hospitalized due to extreme stress. With Emily's help, they thoroughly investigated and found records from when he took over the business. It was worded cautiously, but the gist was that my mother is mentally unstable, so Steve could do as he pleased. Taking advantage of the state my grieving mother was in, he forced her into an overwhelmingly advantageous contract for himself. I was livid, but I knew I couldn't rush things, or all our efforts would be in vain. I told Emily to stay calm. With this, the connection in the story was established. About a month later, Steve seemed to have returned, but he was far from normal. He'd say nonsensical things one moment and then suddenly go out and drown himself in alcohol. It must have been tough for Michael to see his father like that, but he approached Steve all for the sake of the investigation.
I had to pick up my father from the bar after he'd had too much to drink and managed to get him alone.
Then, Michael told us over the phone about the business and about our father.
He said proudly, for some reason, I sabotaged the brakes of the car that David was driving.
Michael's voice trembling increasingly as he continued, audible through the speaker phone. We could hear him sniffling and his voice choking up.
He also made David's wife take on a lot of debt. And then he took over David's business. Essentially, he wanted to take over David's business to expand his own.
Both I and Emily were speechless after hearing this. The cause of our father's death might not have been an accident after all. It might have been deliberately caused by a man named Steve Klein. Any normal person would find it hard to find words after such a revelation. In front of this heart-wrenching story, neither Emily or I could shed a tear. All we could hear from the speaker was Michael's sobbing and continuous apologies. However, our father passed away almost 10 years ago. All we know is that a drunk Steve mentioned tampering with the brakes, and there's no concrete evidence that he intentionally caused the accident. How can we bring him to justice? After some thought, I first demanded his resignation as a major shareholder. The disgraceful scene he made, especially at a board member's wedding, was unforgivable. As Michael told me, Steve has been depending on alcohol recently and hasn't been working. His reputation had already hit rock bottom, and no one protested when he stepped down. With Michael's support, another board member was promoted to CEO. After that, I put all my effort into finding the mechanic. From that time, Michael even took a leave of absence to help me out.
"I'll settle this for my father," he repeated multiple times with determination.
I genuinely thought he was admirable. At the same time, I felt he was an amazing son-in-law, and I could trust him with my sister, Emily. A year after starting our investigation into Steve and my father, we finally found the mechanic who tampered with the brakes. He was just an average worker at a small garage in Alabama. However, he was former. When he learned that his actions had led to someone's death, he quit his job and shut himself in. When Michael talked to him about Steve, this former mechanic confessed through tears.
"It seems there's a big building now, but the workshop was small. I didn't earn enough to support my family,"
he said, trembling, revealing his traumatic past one detail at a time.
"Then, your father, Steve, came with a drawing. He said if I followed the plan, the payment would be substantial. I knew that drawing was suspicious, but I got blinded by the money.
The amount Steve offered was astonishing.
I've always been torn, whether I should confess or not, but I was scared. Scared of being punished. No, of retaliation from that man. I was terrified."
Out of fear and guilt, he confined himself to his room. The family he wanted to protect left him, and he's been living a meager existence ever since. "Shall we go to the police together?" I suggested. Wanting to atone for his sins, he nodded vigorously, his eyes red from crying. During the police interrogation, he confessed everything. He tampered with the brakes under Steve Klein's instructions, took the money, and that led to my father's death. He told everything. Using his statement, Steve was taken in as a strong person of interest. The investigation into his wrongdoing and illegal activities led to his formal arrest. But even with Steve's arrest, my father isn't coming back. Days went by, filled with emptiness and no sense of accomplishment. One day, when I returned home, I noticed an unfamiliar luxury car parked in the driveway. Wondering what was going on, I entered the house and found Emily and Michael in the living room. My mother was serving tea, indicating that my arrival was just moments after their visitors.
Excuse me for interrupting.
We are sorry for coming without notice.
No worries, but what's going on? You both seem so formal. Both were dressed in formal attire for some reason.
Well, I have something I want to discuss with you, Kevin.
Michael said with a serious expression.
What Steve Klein did is unforgivable. Can his son marry the daughter of the man who was betrayed by him? That's equally unacceptable. That's how I feel.
Michael then, with tears in his eyes, began to talk about breaking up with Emily. From Emily's calm demeanor, it seemed she had been consulted in advance. I see. If you want to break up, just do it. You're both adults after all. It's your choice.
Kevin.
But that's only if you really want to break up. Michael looked at me as if asking what I meant. If you feel responsible for what your father did and that's why you're saying this, it's a different story.
Why?
Michael looked shocked. Maybe I hit the nail on the head. The responsibility for what that man did lies with him. You, who were just an elementary school student at the time, don't have to take any blame. So, I have a request. I looked into his eyes enthusiastically. Despite his confusion, I continued, if your feelings for Emily haven't changed, please make her happy.
Kevin, I'm sorry. You're right. My feelings haven't changed. I still truly want to be with her.
He said that white crying. Emily, sitting beside him, covered her face with both hands, blushing. Emily, are you okay with that?
Yes, thanks, Kevin.
Somehow, the mood made me feel embarrassed too. To lighten the mood, we all laughed for a while, including my mother. As the day waned, the sky turned orange. Listening to the distant crow's cawing, I started to talk to my father's tombstone. It's been a while, Dad. I reported recent events. Last year, Emily got married. Her husband's an executive at her company, a really honest man. The flowers seemed to nod in the breeze. It looked like my father was happy for Emily's happiness. I also briefly mentioned Steve. But don't worry, I made sure to get back at the devil who deceived you. The verdict isn't out yet, but he seems remorseful. I'm uncertain about what punishment Steve will face. Will he regret his actions? Apologize to my father? It's up to him and out of my understanding. Like the mechanic who tampered with brakes but didn't confess out of fear. Perhaps Steve too was scared of retaliation. His unusual reaction at Emily and Michael's wedding. It seemed to tell the answer. What was it like, holding a position acquired through deceit? Now that he's lost his reputation and credibility, how does he feel? If only he could experience the same pain as my father. Maybe I'm wicked for thinking that. Still, I'll hold my head high and live. I aspire to be someone strong, someone who doesn't shame himself. Conveying these wishes to my father, I tidied up and left the cemetery,